How's it going, guys? And I'm here with a retro review. And I know a lot of people have requested this. You're probably surprised by the choice. You probably expected like an Attitude Era or Ruthless Aggression pay-per-view, SmackDown or Raw. A lot of people have like requested certain shows, but a lot of people were more general about it. They're like, just review something retro, review something old. And I'm like, okay, so we should take a look at what's considered by many people to be the worst pay-per-view of all time. And that is really like a big stretch to say, and I'm going to state it right from the offset. This is not, the worst pay-per-view ever. It's not even really like a horrible pay-per-view, to be quite honest, when you take everything into consideration. And I think a lot of people, I've watched reviews on here, I've talked about, and a lot of people know, ever since I did that video where I did like my top 10 the top 10 YouTube videos for WWE. People saw on the side because I used OBS that I was subscribed to Wrestling with Regret. And the thing is, I do enjoy the guy. The guy does make some good videos, but boy, oh boy, do I disagree with him on a lot. It's mostly his presentation I enjoy, but he reviewed this show. I think it was actually not too long ago, and I don't think he really understood what happened on this show, like going into it. I think he should have probably prefaced his review. So I have actually gone back and watched since episode 1 of WWECW, as a lot of people call it, the WWE version of ECW. I think there's a lot of interesting stuff that happened on that show. I think a lot of people were expecting it to be exactly like ECW, but ECW had a lot of flaws. So it was nice to actually have the ECW originals there with some of the new talent. And you could kind of see why certain people were in ECW. Like, for example, Hardcore Holly was a good fit. Someone like CM Punk, the athleticism. WWE had talked about this, like in a lot of their documentaries and stuff on ECW. And they're right. It wasn't always about hardcore. Everyone always associates ECW with just blood and guts. And there might have been a lot of that. But you had a lot of athleticism. Rob Van Dam and, so many others. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit. Yeah, now, granted, that was a little bit earlier on in ECW in like the mid-90s. But you could see where the vibe was coming from. And they didn't really stray too far from the formula. Yes, there was definitely the more of the sports entertainment aspect to it that a lot of people didn't like, and they wanted to try to get away from it. And they did infuse a lot of WWE stars. So, like, if you were, like, sour on the product and you wanted to kind of get away from the WWE wrestlers, like kind of the way how Joey Styles, remember when he around the One Night Stand pay-per-view for 2006, before they started doing this weekly show on Tuesdays on Sci-Fi. And I'll never forget how like bewildered I was by the fact that this show was on Sci-Fi. I know we're talking about the pay-per-view, but this is what I was criticizing Wrestling with Regret for. Not prefacing it properly, not explaining what was going on the show. There was quite a lot to really like about it. You had Rob Van Dam and Hardcore Holly, Rob Van Dam and Tess, some really amazing matches that were definitely more hardcore than what we were getting on the WWE like branded product at the time. So there was differences without a doubt, but they did bring on a lot of WWE talent because the Big Show would end up taking the title. And I remember I was not happy about this at the time. Hey, look, I have no qualms about admitting this, guys, but I was pretty much like a real like IWCer, a real Smark, a real Mark. And, I was actually really into like reading the dirt sheets and reading Wade Keller. And I talked about this in the past. People really like, on the internet, just like so much with, the work rate. And it was all about like, if they did enough moves in this match and if the match wasn't long enough, take stars away. I frequented the message boards back then, and my God, what a different perspective I had watching it this time. Like, I really enjoyed the shows. When Big Show was defending the title against Ric Flair, The Undertaker, Kane, like all these WWE stars coming in, like from Raw and SmackDown, it was like really good, these shows. Like, yeah, no, they weren't Attitude Era quality, but keep in mind, this was an hour, just an hour, and they would pack so much entertainment and great stuff. And there you had Kelly's expose, just throwing in like not the divas, but the vixens, which was an interesting take. I'm not sure how much I like them calling the wrestlers extremists and stuff. That was like a little bit weird in a way that didn't really fit as much as Superstar, but they were trying to kind of separate the brand, but bringing in like Kane, Undertaker, you could kind of see where it didn't really feel as original. They started making things a bit too cross-branded, and you could see why people would have a problem with that, because you'd expect it it to be like the Sandman and like other like ECW guys, and they did get their shot. Everyone was like falling to the Big Show, and I have to say, this title reign that the Big Show had, now granted, I think they were always going to give it to him, but we all know the thing with Rob Van Dam getting caught with the marijuana, and that led to him having to give up the title. They suspended him for 30 days, and they wrote that into the storyline because Paul Heyman didn't want him to be there, so he suspended RVD. But, basically everybody really knew what was going on there. But they were trying to like buy time, I think, by putting Ric Flair, Kane, The Undertaker, because that all took place during the month that RVD was serving his suspension. But we were getting like a lot of like Sabu and everything. Sabu was wrestling RVD in a ladder match to get the opportunity to go for the title at SummerSlam. Sabu had like a few rematches for the title. We were introduced to Kevin Thorne and Mike Knox, who was the jealous boyfriend. And you had this interesting dynamic with, Kelly coming on to CM Punk, and Mike Knox didn't like the fact that his girlfriend was an exhibitionist. And, the funniest thing about this whole show is hearing Taz and Joey Styles adding such a great flavor to the commentary. Like, I did like, don't get me wrong, I like Taz and Michael Cole. Taz, like, really woke up Michael Cole. If Michael Cole has the right partner, he could be good. But, for so many years, it was like the King was kind of just sleepwalking through Raw. They watered him down, and then you had him with Corey Graves and Byron Saxton and all these other goofballs. So he didn't really have a lot of, room to shine, because Cole on his own is just like bland and lazy. So you had Taz and Joey Styles really livening things up. So heading into this show, you actually had quite a few storylines. Hardcore Holly hated RVD. The Big Show was the dominant champion. They brought in Bobby Lashley, and they had this idea for the Extreme Elimination Chamber. We're going to take the Elimination Chamber, fill it with weapons. Perfect for ECW, right? Because ECW, hardcore, why not? Do this for ECW's first WWE, WWECW pay-per-view. It made sense. And I thought that was, a good booking decision. And basically everybody in this match had history with one another. Bobby Lashley kind of put in there at the last minute. And what they did on this pay-per-view is they found the way of getting Sabu out of the Elimination Chamber after he earned his place in it. That's upset a lot of the Smarks. They replaced him with Hardcore Holly, who was originally supposed to be in it. And if you actually look on Wikipedia, it was said that Vince McMahon, I believe this is actually true, Vince McMahon didn't want Sabu to be in this match. He wanted Hardcore Holly to be in it because it was like more villains for Bobby Lashley to have to go through in this match. And that kind of makes sense. It really does more opposition because that was Paul Heyman's crew. It was the Big Show, Test, and Hardcore Holly. Those were his goons, and, he had the Basham brothers who were dressed up, in the riot gear, and they were his two security officers. So, it made sense to kind of have Hardcore Holly in there one way or another. So they made Sabu got attacked on this pay-per-view. But let's run through some of these, let's run through the matches that they had on December to Dismember. We started off with a really, really good match here. We had the Hardys defeating Eminem, and this is just a really, really good match. Really long, almost a half an hour. I was I almost forgot how long this match was. Because I actually have this on DVD. That was the first time that I saw this. Years later, after it came out, I bought the DVD, I watched it, and, I remember liking the match then too, watching it now again. I think I liked it even more. This match was just so well done, and Eminem wasn't even that experienced of a team. They had already given Nitro the Intercontinental title, and they had broken up the team. But then they kind of realized that Joey Mercury wasn't doing too well on his own. He just didn't have, the presence of John Morrison. And John Morrison, who's Johnny Nitro at this point, he did not have a lot of, promo skills. He improved so much. Honestly, watching him, again, in 2021, before he was released from WWE, you could just see the promos that he was cutting. There's no comparison to, how he was then to how he is now. He came so far. And you could even see that. When he became John Morrison, it really seemed to, awaken him and his character, and that he was supposed to be this super flamboyant character. No, I think he just kind of worked on himself, really, to be quite honest. But this is just an excellent Hardys match. Eminem proved that they were a good fit for the Hardys. But you could tell, when was the last time they had a match this long on a pay-per-view? That not even the main events would go this long. Not even TLC matches would go this long. What was going on here? Why was this so long? It's because they didn't really have a lot on this show, because a lot of their main players were used up in the Extreme Elimination Chamber. And see, this is where a lot of people miss the mark on this review when they review this show. They totally just kind of goofed a little bit by, they had a really good main event lined up with some really, just some of the best in there at the time. But, you're using up all those guys. And first of all, this match has, nothing to do with ECW, if you might have noticed in the opener. Matt and Jeff Hardy just kind of showed up. They hadn't teamed together since Matt had returned to the company. And then Jeff Hardy followed soon after, and basically just a few months from here. I remember he returned, I believe, right before SummerSlam, if I'm not mistaken. And they got together for the first time on ECW, and they had a tag match against the FBI, and then they had a match against Sylvester Terkay and Elijah Burke, which was really confusing, because they kind of destroyed them in that match, and Sylvester Terkay was coming in as this big MMA dude, and they kind of he gets pinned in the match, and I was looking back on this, I was what the fuck? They just beat him outright for no reason, but they just desperately needed some top quality talent. They needed a good match for this show, and they knew to go to the Hardys, and the Hardys were not rusty at all. They, they hadn't teamed together in a while, but they were doing tandem offense and just good chemistry. But yeah, a long match, but I compare this long match to the long matches of today, and there's no contest. I wasn't bored during this match. But, you could see at the next match, they were kind of running out of ideas already. So we had Matt Striker and Balls Mahoney. And Balls gets the win with a sky high on that Striker, which this is a good match. It just didn't feel very pay-per-view-ish. And the thing is, very confusing why they had this match here, because there was like no heat between these guys. Balls was the face. Striker was being a good heel. He was cutting some good promos. He was being super entertaining even before the match, talking about Striker's rules. He tells the referee he wants to enforce the rules, even like no moves off the top rope and stuff like that. Like, just really good at just getting heat, basically, and really just kind of being himself, playing the role as a teacher. This is just when they still just got it, when WWE, they let Striker be himself. What, you're a former teacher at Cardoza High School? Go ahead. Go out there and be a teacher, but be a condescending, heelish teacher. And Joey Styles plays up the fact that like he was fired from his job, and this was a real thing. He really was. And this was actually like in the papers. It was like a news story, and they took advantage of it. Now, granted, they put him on the brand that got the lowest ratings, but, he was on, like, Heat for a while, and I think they featured him on, on Raw a few times, but nothing big. But this is where, like, Striker started to get noticed, and I thought he was a good heel. But Striker's, his feud was with the Sandman at the time. And it was, like, a fun little feud because you had, like, such a contrast, and yes, there's a contrast here with Balls Mahoney, especially with Joey Styles referring to Balls as Captain Caveman and talking about how he proves the theory of evolution for Darwin and all that. So it is kind of like, you think about the Neanderthal versus like the Brainiac, the intellectual, and it's a good feud when you think about it, but there really wasn't a feud there. So they kind of just threw this out there, and, it was good for what it was. You want to talk about, like, competent wrestling. You watch these two guys and, just putting on a pretty solid match. But, you expect it from a pay-per-view. You want to have big feuds. And if Sandman didn't even have a match on this whole show, which was, like, really just perplexing, to say the least. Like, and the funny thing is, Sandman is on the poster to this pay-per-view. His hand is anyway, his arm with the Singapore cane coming out of the chimney. Not really one of my favorite posters, but he's there, so it's like you'd expect them. And he is on the show, but not in the match. Then we get Elijah Burke and Sylvester Terkay defeating the FBI. And I just mentioned these two teams, which is kind of funny because the Hardys wrestled both these guys, beat them, and now they're here in a match together. Trinity is definitely, and she was in TNA, if anyone remembers. I believe she was alongside like Glenn Gilberti and a few others. She was in there with SEX, Russo's group, and so it was cool to see her. I remember at the time I was like really surprised, like, oh, Trinity is there, and this kind of perplexed like people like Wrestling with Regret. Like, he has a conniption in his review. Well, who's Trinity? Where'd she come from? Like, like if he hadn't noticed, like other people on the show, like Matt Striker and others, leading up to this point, were in an ECW. That's what like annoyed me. Like every single person had to be from ECW. Not everyone from ECW was really that great, and they did give people some opportunities. Like they had Amish Roadkill, they had Danny Doring in there. Danny Doring looked like he was kind of out of shape. I remember he wrestled Rob Van Dam and a few others on the ECW show on Sci-Fi. Yeah, Trinity though, really hot, and she was in the Extreme Strip Poker special, which I recommend everyone watch on Peacock. That's a lot of fun. Balls Mahoney is the dealer, and it's just, yeah, it's good. I think everyone will like the Diva selection in that one. You'll see like the long forgotten Crystal, who was like supposed to get married to Teddy Long. She's in there, but I digress. Anyway, Elijah Berg and Sylvester Terkay go over on the FBI. This is just a pretty forgettable squash match. Elijah Burke hits the Jeff Jarrett stroke, which is the Elijah experience, and gets the win. Davari defeated Tommy Dreamer. This is the point where you really have to say, like, okay, were they even trying when they booked this? Like, did they really think that Davari at this time was going to go over? When he was with Muhammad Hassan was cutting promos in English. He was, entertaining. There was a lot of potential in Muhammad Hassan. And you could even see it in this feud with Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan and later on The Undertaker. If they didn't do that stupid terrorist thing, they definitely would have had they definitely would have had like a long career together, like as a team, or at least Muhammad Hassan would have had like a pretty lengthy career doing what he was doing, because very competent wrestler, good character, storyline was going places, but they did something stupid and they paid for it. And here we had Davari being left over, and Davari like lasted quite a long time. Like, remember, the Muhammad Hassan stuff was from like early 2005 and lasted to that summer. And Davari was kind of just there still hanging around, and he acted as the manager of the Great Khali, but the Great Khali didn't even come until like a year and a half later. So I don't know what Davari was really doing all this time. Like, they didn't show him. I know he had some cruiserweight matches. I specifically remember a match against Gregory Helms on SmackDown. But yeah, Davari here against Tommy Dreamer, and Davari beats Tommy Dreamer by holding his tights. This was like a really cheap match, and I really felt like they did Dreamer dirty in this one. Like, did anyone really believe that, like, Tommy Dreamer would get beat by Davari here? Like, it didn't make any sense, especially since you had like Dreamer going over people like Kevin Thorne just a few weeks prior, I remember. So I still had that fresh in my mind. After the match, Dreamer goes after Davari looking for some payback, but Khali comes out of the back, grabs Dreamer, drops him with a big choke bomb on the steel stage. And Dreamer, really sells for this move, really puts this move over. And, he kind of like gets up on his own. Everyone's around him trying to help him up. And, okay, that part, like at the end, it had a little extra drama, but this match, like, this is a pay-per-view. Ariel and Kevin Thorne defeated Kelly and Mike Knox, and I understood what they were going for here. At first, if you're watching this match, you're like, what the hell is going on? Both of these teams are like heels, except for Kelly, who's been coming on to CM Punk, and CM Punk is in the Elimination Chamber, and like, Mike Knox is here, and he doesn't really have anyone to wrestle. He didn't make it into the chamber. So how they kind of figured this out, Kelly grabs the mic, says good luck to CM Punk. Then we have Mike Knox just walking out on Kelly during the match. We have a little bit of Mike Knox and Kevin Thorne. Ariel looked really good. Underrated diva, underrated vixen, Shelly Martinez, who would later go on to TNA and be on LAX with Homicide and Conan and Hernandez, if anyone remembers that. Salinas, she would go on to be. I was always a big fan of Kevin Thorne. Missed opportunity for sure with this guy. They would keep him on for like another year. But I always liked the guy. I even liked what Mordecai brought to the table. Yes, same guy, Kevin Fertig. But Kevin Thorne never came back to WWE after being released, and was a big missed opportunity. I thought this guy definitely had an amazing look to him. I liked the character. I just am really also disappointed that they never got Gangrel. Like, Gangrel couldn't like get into shape at this time, or so it was said, and they were going to have like a stable together, and that would have been cool to have all these people together. But Kevin Thorne and Ariel were good as a team, and I thought Ariel really played the role very well here. And so did Kevin Thorne, always like really sticking to the character, having that look. Like Thorne looked like a vampire, just like Gangrel. And that's why I wish we could have seen those two guys on screen together, but we sadly never did. So I do like the dynamic where Knox walks out on Kelly, feeds her to the wolves. Ariel hits her with an STO, knocks her down, and then gets the pin. Sandman comes out at the end because they're beating up on Kelly after the bell, and there's your Sandman spot. He chases the heels off. A good cat fight there. We got to see Kelly, and and Ariel. Then we had what was finally a really good match, and of course, because they packed all the stars into here, Bobby Lashley defeats Big Show, Test, Rob Van Dam, Hardcore Holly, and CM Punk in the Extreme Elimination Chamber match, and there's a lot of impressive stuff in here. And I've seen people badmouth this chamber match, and they're just like, I guess you just can't please everybody. Because you've got Test coming off the top with a big elbow drop onto a chair, onto RVD, which is just, that spot right there is super brutal. And of course, RVD gets pinned there because, nowadays people will be kicking out of that, but that right there, that was a match ender. That's how you want to end a match, and or get an elimination in this case. And CM Punk goes out first, which the crowd was not happy about. You definitely had like a very internet savvy crowd here. Hardcore Holly gets betrayed by Test with a big boot. Bobby Lashley eliminates Test, and then Lashley defeats Big Show. They had some little interesting stuff where, when Lashley was supposed to be let out of his pod, the Basham security team, which you don't know, they're the Bashams. They throw the referee, they beat him up. And then they put their nightsticks in the slot where it's supposed to open up the chamber, and Lashley can't get out. But everyone's got weapons in their chamber. Lashley has the table, so he takes the table and he smashes the chains above him. I thought that was a pretty cool way of escaping. And then we've got, Big Show and Lashley, and it's just down to them two at the end. This is a pretty good exchange. I like where Lashley is blocking the baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire, which was in Big Show's pod. I thought that was cool, and it ends with a spear. Big Show is bleeding. We've got just a really good end right there. And Lashley in a pretty hard fought victory, I would say, because he had to go through Test. And, everything is at a rapid pace here. And Lashley shows that, even though he's still fairly new, only, on the main roster for not even a little bit over a year. He was there, the end of 2005. Really good showing here. Really good, and a really good chamber match. So, what do I think of this? Was it a good pay-per-view? It's really hard to say that when you've only have two good matches out of the 6, but also it's only 2 hours and 15 minutes, and I'll tell you right now, if I paid $40 for this and didn't get the average 2 hours and 40 minutes out of it, I would have been super pissed off by that shit. But yeah, this show actually ended up being one of the lowest selling pay-per-views, if not one of the lowest selling ones. And the attendance was also they also did this in a smaller arena. So it's really, there was only 4,800 people. I got that up here on my screen, and a buy rate of 90,000, which for this time, 2006 was pretty damn low. So, but I would not say that this was one of the worst pay-per-views of all time, because you had a good main event, a good opener, and it wasn't that long, really. And the matches that they did have, they weren't terrible. They just weren't super memorable. And, the Kelly match, I mean, that did serve a storyline purpose. And the Striker one was fun with Striker's antics. And, you just had and the thing is, you watch these matches, I know it's not a good comparison, but like all of them are better than basically anything you'd get today on an average episode of like Raw or SmackDown. So there's that. So, but I had a decent time watching this. I wasn't bored. It was just kind of underwhelming in the middle, but you know, you just had really, come on, you had a half an hour match with the Hardys. You get another half an hour with the Chamber. So you got a good hour there out of like, and the other like hour and 15 minutes is like kind of sort of underwhelming or so, but you know, whatever. It's what I'm saying is it's not a good show. It's not a great show, but it's a decent show and it's enjoyable. If you watch it, if you've never seen it before, I think you'll kind of be surprised that it's really not that bad as a lot of people say that it is. I think it's definitely a competent show, and yeah, I was entertained. So there you go, guys. I hope you all enjoyed the review. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the bell so you get all notifications when I post all my new videos. I want to thank all my patrons for your continued supports, and let me know what you thought of this retro review, guys. Would you like to see more? Let me know in the comments below. And until next time.